Hello and welcome to the Car Kernel channel. And we looked at the Sienna a few days ago on a video. We inspected it. We said that it had a front wheel bearing there. It's noisy. Well, in today's video, I'm going to share with you some tips and tricks. The front wheel bearing is not exactly a DIY process because you need a press, and I'm going to show you this entire process as we replace the front wheel bearing on the Sienna. Let's get started. So first thing is we want to remove the knuckle out because that's where the bearing is pressed in. And something funny for you guys, I spoke to the owner of this car. They just had this bearing replaced. That's the best part. So I see already signs, the axle nut's not staked in, and things are not well if you just replace the wheel bearing and it's singing louder than it used to. But the first thing is we're going to remove the caliper. And the way I remove the caliper in this case, because we're not doing brakes, we're going to remove the entire caliper, bracket, and the caliper together. I'm going to take the two 17s in the back. Then we're going to get a bungee cord and hang our caliper. Never hang your caliper from the rubber hose. Yes, the rubber hose is strong and it can handle all the brake pressure, but you don't want to just unnecessarily strain it. That's the idea of hanging the caliper. This is going to be a little bit in the way. Move this to the back. There we go. That's out of the way now. Rotor comes out. Now, the speed sensor wire is right here. It's a 10 millimeter. We're going to remove that. Here's that speed sensor. It's 10 millimeter bolts that holds it. In rusty land, this will be a little harder to remove, but this one came right out. Now, when it comes to the axle nut, you have multiple ways. This one is not staked, so it's going to come right out. Normally it's staked, so you're either going to grind this if it's super rusty, or you're going to try to use a chisel or a drift just to get underneath it and lift it up. But in our case here, somebody decided not to stake it. It's not a good idea. There goes that. Actually, we quoted the customer an axle nut. This one is perfectly fine because they never staked it. So we're going to reuse this one, take it off the ticket. Make sure your axle is loose, not tight like this. Push it in. If it doesn't, take a chisel and a hammer and kind of push it in just so it's loose. Now we get our two nuts and one bolt for the lower bolt joint. And you're kind of going to pull on your control arm to release the ball joint. Here's that. That's all loose. And before we get all carried away, totally forgot about the tie rod. So you have to disconnect your outer tie rod right here. A little bit of manual persuasion. There it goes. Now our knuckle is ready to come out. So now all we got to do holding the knuckle are the two strut bolts. Majority of them are 22 millimeter. Some of them are 19 when you get to the Corolla smaller cars. Now there is the knuckle. Let's go to the press. We'll talk about it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is remove this deflector wheel. All this does is just protects debris from getting to the speed sensor. So you take a screwdriver. These are sometimes a pain to remove. And if you damage them, just get a new one. It's not a big deal. And this one we were hoping would cooperate since it's not a rusty car. I guess not. Okay, well, it did cooperate. Well, that's out. Next thing is, before we do anything, we want to separate the bearing from the hub. And to do that, we go a little bit off the book. So you see how the hub is right here in the middle and the bearing is on the outside, and here's the snap ring. We're going to talk about that in a second. Here's the best way we found through experience. You find a hammer that fits inside the hub, find a much bigger and heavier hammer, and start the negotiations. So let's pop our hub out. This one really does not want to move, so we're going to readjust and start again. And readjust a little bit. It's coming. It's going. You see how the See how the hub is, see how the hub has come down? We're almost out. There we go. That didn't take much. Here's our hub. Let's get it ready to be reused, and we'll talk about hubs and reusing them. So here's how we're gonna save our hub. Hubs are very expensive, especially if you go original. The part of the inner race of the bearing usually sticks to it, so you cannot really get this out easily with a press, and you have to modify a piece. So there is a method, but you have to be pretty careful with it. And for that method, safety glasses, air protection. You're gonna keep hearing. We're gonna take a cutter and we're gonna make a cut in the race. And after we make a cut, we cannot go all the way in because we're gonna damage the surface of the hub. You make a cut and then you use an air hammer to crack the race, and then it comes right out. That is the idea. Let me cut it and then we'll show you how this is gonna progress. So now we made a small cut. We're going to take our air hammer and try to crack the race. This piece comes out. There you go. So we got the race. Here's the cut out of it. You basically want to make a relief cut and crack it. This one just cracked in the front, not really all the way across, but this bearing was just replaced, that's why it was simpler. Your hub is saved. You can use it if with the cutter you make a little nick here. Don't freak out. This is okay from experience. If you have a little nick in it, should be okay. I've never had issues with them. Now we're done with the hub. Let's start actually getting the bearing ready to be compressed out. Now we have the snap ring that actually holds the bearing in the knuckle. This bearing comes out this way, so we're going to need to remove this snap ring. Just in rusty land, this usually does not happen. So what you're going to do if you're in rusty land, you're going to put a screwdriver here and tap this a little bit, tap the other end a little bit. This will move it a little bit, then you can get it out. If these break off, and if this is, we're talking about a really rusty car, you're gonna have to get a Dremel tool, cut a cut right here, and then you can fold these in. You're gonna need an air hammer, and this is where things get complicated. But this one came out. We can technically reuse this, but I already got a new one. We're just gonna put a new one here. Now let's go to the press. Let's press our bearing out. So before we press the bearing out, we wanna get the guts out of it. By the way, these are the actual ball bearings. So we're gonna just jam a screwdriver in here, kind of get the cage out. This one, since it's basically a new bearing that got mishandled, or it's a really cheap quality one, really tight. Usually these come right out. This plastic cage is usually brittle, but here it is. Here's the ball bearing part. It's of course garbage, and then there's the seal that we're going to want to get a screwdriver and kind of push it down and pop it out. And this one, of course, being a new bearing, is gonna fight us a little bit. There it is. There we go. The reason you get this stuff out is you want good access to the actual base of the bearing. Reposition here. So we're going to get an adapter that fits. These adapters and everything you're going to see here is actually part of the hub grappler that I don't like very much because it broke and it loves to break. It's just too much of a hassle. I'd rather use the right tools for the job, I suppose, which is a press. So now we got everything positioned. You always press the bearing going down towards the car. This is where the hub used to be. You go that way. Many manufacturers will have it the other way. Toyota has almost always had it this way, which is not the norm. So we're gonna bring our press down. If you ever buy a press, this simple safety, never put your hand in here when you're operating the press, or things are under pressure. So it's gonna take probably right around 5 tons of pressure to get this bearing to break loose and out. Although this one's been out recently, so it's gonna make a big pop. And you're gonna hear it. Let's press it. Yeah, right around 6. You heard that pop. Out goes the bearing. There it goes. Let's undo the press. Get our adapters out. So, here's the bearing. It's out. And then immediately flip your knuckle, because we're going to now install the new bearing. Few things. Don't throw out old bearings, because you're going to see how we're going to use this to drive the new bearing in. Other thing, don't go in here and start cleaning. You want the press fit. You start cleaning this with any kind of abrasive, or I see people use like die grinders to clean it up. Well, you'll no longer have an interference fit. Never clean the inside. Install your bearing and you're done. Let's get the new bearing and we'll get this installed. So we got the new bearing. This is a brand new Toyota bearing. Yes, it is made by Koyo, but if you go buy a real Koyo, it will cost almost the same. So let's just get a new OEM bearing. Bearings, they don't have sides. People have wrote essays about this. Install it like this or install it like this. It's exactly the same thing. Get your old bearing, stand it right on top of your new bearing. Then get the same adapter. Preferably, we're gonna flip this bearing. Put your same adapter you used to remove. Get things as close as possible. And then, let's press it in. It's almost impossible to get everything perfectly lined up straight. So you're gonna try your best to get it as straight as possible. But you'll see what happens once we get this going. Now let's press the new bearing in. That's one of the part that I told you can never press this exactly straight because of the way the knuckle sits. And it'll eventually correct itself, so don't worry. The way you know the bearing is pressed all the way is when you see your groove for the snap ring. This one is all the way in, and you notice the press will go, 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 then it stops. You hit a dead stop, and if you flip it and look on the other side, you see your new bearing is maxed out. That's it. Now, before we do anything else, we're gonna put our new snap ring. We're gonna get our new snap ring ready, and let's install it. That snap ring is in. Something I learned the hard way from experience. You always want to make sure the snap ring is seated. So take a screwdriver and a hammer, just tap on it a little bit, make sure it's seated, that it's not halfway seated. This one, however, is not rusty land, so it went right in. Now we're going to install the hub, and there's something very important about the hub. So we're going to remove our knuckle and we're going to start working on our hub. Take the old bearing you removed, put it right on the nose of the hub. Put it down. Do not clean the surface. I see so many people clean the surface and then the interference fit becomes not interference anymore and it's loose. You're going to stand your knuckle right on top of it. And we're going to find, and this is the most important part, you have to find an adapter that fits the inner race. If you press it on the outside, you immediately destroy this bearing. You have to hold the guts of the bearing against the pressure of the hub pressing in. So this is very, very essential. Do this part wrong and we start from the beginning. So we're gonna find a adapter. This one fits right in the middle. See how it fits right in the middle, not on the edge, not covering the outside, covering the inside. Then we're gonna get a couple of our smaller adapters because the bigger one don't fit. Now we're gonna press it. Something very important that you do here as you press your hub in. Centering it would help. Right when you get close, stop and double check that your middle bracket is, the middle adapter is lined up with the middle of the bearing. So now we're going to press it. As you press it, move your bearing side to side. Do you see how I'm moving my bearing? If we have a problem and bearing is getting destroyed, this will actually stop turning. So as you press it, you're gonna turn your bearing. You reach the end. When it stops like that, we're done. You see how we're building up pressure? That's it. The only thing I will warn you about is some of these presses, they max out. They don't have a lot of travel. So you're gonna flip and look. If you have no gap here, we're good between the knuckle and the bearing. And that's about it. This bearing is in. We're gonna have to install our dust cover, which really is self-explanatory. Let's install it real quick. The dust cover will have an opening for the speed sensor. Find the opening, line it up. This can be tricky to install sometimes. This one I don't think will be tricky. So because this is a Florida car and this is not the norm for our area, I'll share with you a few things about this. Don't be tempted to grind the area behind it if your old one doesn't want to sit down. If you get a new one, it's going to be very hard to install it because you have rust behind it. If you clean this rust behind it, make sure you don't overdo it, because if you overdo it, this will be loose and it'll pop out and it'll make all kinds of noise. This one is good. When you install it though, run your finger on the inside. Make sure when you pried it off, you didn't create any bends, because any bends here on the inside will start making a scraping noise against your axle. So this one is good. We don't really have to fight this one. Seat it. Let's go install it back in the car. So, I'm going to install our knuckle back. So I find my bolts. There they are. Put the two strut bolts. Let's get our axle in. Let me get a pry bar for this. So you're gonna put your pry bar in the opening in the control arm to push it down. And at the same time, this is the part where mechanics wish they had 3 hands. There it goes. Our control arm is connected to the ball joint. Tie rod in. Now you're gonna basically tighten everything back and we're good. Torque specs will vary significantly for those who are DIYing this. If you have access to a press. But there's something very important before we move on. You see how this backing plate got bent? That is normal when you do a bearing. I mean, you're kind of moving it with this. So try to bend it back, and when we put our rotor, we're going to make sure that it's not interfering with anything. We're going to use the same axle nut because this one was never staked. It was a new nut that was never staked. We're going to install everything and we'll check out this bearing. Maybe we'll take it for a quick ride, make sure it's good. And to stake this nut, you just take a chisel, put it right here, and that's it. This is just a secondary safety. Should this nut ever come loose, it won't come flying off. Something will hold it. Now we're gonna put our speed sensor back. Ensure all this stuff routes the right way. You do not want to damage the speed sensor because we were in a rush. Speed sensor is a 10mm. Now that we're all set, I'm gonna put my rotor in the exact same orientation that it was at. And the way you know the orientation is, look at these two holes and find them on the hub. Now this rotor was slid exactly the same way. Now this car, from the inspection, these rotors are warped. They are questionable aftermarket ones, so the owner didn't really want to do this at this time. They just wanted the bearing. But here's what we're gonna do to make sure our backing plate is good. I'm gonna put a nut just to hold it straight, and I'm gonna look, making sure that our backing plate does not contact our rotor at all. And it is not. We are good. Let's install our brakes back. We're pretty much done at this point. We're gonna install our wheel, turn it, make sure nothing is making abnormal noise and whatnot, and then we're ready for our test drive. Alright, this wheel is done. Let's spin it. It is already not making noise. Remember from the previous video, if you want to check bearings, and let's recap this, put your hand on the spring and turn your wheel. You'll feel the vibration in the bad bearing here. So there you have it, folks. This is the bearing completely done. We're going to take it for a test drive in a bit, but let me share with you a few important things. Every time you remove the knuckle from the front of Toyota front-wheel drive configuration, you need to do an alignment because you actually change the camber, which changes the toe. So this car will need an alignment after this. Second thing is, you do want to go drive and make sure there are no weird noises, because if there's any weird noises now, they're only going to get worse. And the third most important thing, you noticed how I pressed the bearing out. Never press the bearing out from the ears where the caliper goes, because that part, if you think it is strong, if you bend it, your caliper will actually be too close or too far away from the wheel. When you install everything and you turn the wheel, the caliper will be locked up. This will send you on a loop of what's happened, why all of a sudden things are locking up, but it's actually you bent the knuckle. You can bend it back because it is steel. If you have an aluminum knuckle, you'll never have a press-in bearing. That's not how this works. You'll always have a bolt-in bearing. That's completely different. 4 bolts doesn't really come out because usually they're welded because they're similar metals. But all your steel knuckles front-wheel drive cars in the front will have this style. Some of the older ones had it in the rear, like the RX and the old Highlander. But most of the rears are bolt-ons. Most of the fronts are going to be press-on, just like this one. Let's go for a test drive, then we'll wrap up the video. All right. Let's go for our test drive. Let's pump the brakes just in case we moved anything. Alrighty. Close the shop door. AC is running. It's pretty hot outside today. And probably people of the south will look at us. Look, it's not that hot. It's like 85, 86. Pretty hot for us. We've gotten used to the cold weather here. Oh, it's already quiet. And when we took it to the drive, you could tell it was loud just by going like 20 miles an hour. Yep, it's already nice and quiet. Let's just take it down the road, make sure it's quiet. Okay, we're good. Steering wheel is a little bit off center. Maybe not, just slightly. And tell the customer we don't do alignments in the shop, so we're gonna ask them to take it somewhere to get an alignment. It's not going to be like a massive alignment. It's just the center of the wheel, set the camber if needed. But let us see. pretty quiet. I think we're done. Steering wheel is actually straight. They still should check the alignment in case it needs a small tweak, but I think this is a job done. We're done with this car. You guys remember when we inspected this car in another video? I'll link that in case you want to see the full inspection on this car. But this car is in good shape. It's a Florida car. It doesn't really have a lot of rust. It doesn't really have a lot of issues. The little issues that it has are not major. The bearing was really the main one. Tire light, I don't do tires or tire sensors. Just program them, but we don't have a tire machine, so I think we're done. So one job completed. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.